When you're faced with adversity, do you flounder or fly? I'm Simon Ratcliffe, and on Turning the Tables, I share candid, powerful stories of people who have turned around adversity in their personal or business lives to find new purpose and meaning. Hey, it's Simon. It's not often you get the opportunity to interview someone who's been described as one of the greatest performers Britain has ever produced. So as you might imagine, I'm incredibly excited to be talking to actor, singer and comedian Michael Crawford for this special two-part Christmas episode of Turning the Tables. It was a real treat for me, and I hope it will be for you too. Born in 1942, Michael's career spans over 50 years across TV, film and stage on Broadway and the West End of London. Our conversation spans the riotous early performance in a school production of Benjamin Britten's Let's Make an Opera that proved to be Michael's early breakthrough. How Michael developed his unique combination of stuntman agility and comedic vulnerability for the role of Frank Spencer in the BBC TV series Some Mothers Do Have 'Em. A hilarious interview with Gene Kelly for the film of Hello Dolly, which he starred in alongside Barbra Streisand and Walter Matthau. And the chance circumstances that led to Michael getting his most famous role of the Phantom in Andrew Lloyd Webbers' Phantom of the Opera, which became the longest-running show in Broadway history by 10 years and earned him a Tony and Laurence Olivier Award for Best Actor in a Musical. In the second part of the interview, we talk about the struggles in the latter part of his career when Michael suffered from ME, the severe chronic fatigue syndrome, which led to him to take a complete break and move away to a small town in New Zealand to recover. It was in the context of Michael's ME 4 years ago, long after his recovery, that I got to know Michael when I myself had the same condition, and that is where this podcast episode and a friendship was born. So let's get started on this first part of the episode, where we talk about Michael's career. I really wanted to understand what was behind his characterizations, which were described by Ben Lawrence in the Daily Telegraph as edgy, physically mesmeric, and bringing something unique to every role. Welcome to my guest on Turning the Tables, Michael Crawford. It's an absolute honour and pleasure to be talking to you today. You've had an amazingly glittering career. I think the thing I wanted to ask you was, I think that in all of those roles, you really have portrayed a vibrant, energetic, physical character. And I wondered how that had developed through your life.
Well, I think it started at a pretty early age. I was an only child and was very much energized by creating characters, reading I loved. And so the time, very early ages, I would read Swiss Family Robinson and Oliver, things like wonderful classical stories, but which were done for youngsters, photographs and pictures added to help the imagination. And so I was a vociferous reader. And I then became less interested when I was at school because I couldn't hold the concentration that was required. I went to 2 convents. Started out when I was 4, I went to kindergarten, and then went to St. Joseph's Convent in Bexley, and then moved on to a choir school, which is the first time I really started to sing. And not particularly well, but I did my best, and apparently I looked quite good, so they always got me to carry the cross out in the front of the choir. And even though we'd sing at St. Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, the Savoy, Brompton Oratory, I mean, it was multi-denominational. But I was still encouraged to mime rather than sing, because I'd sound too puffed holding the heavy cross up in front of the choir as we walked in. I loved that, and I suppose I was a very shy child, but when I was in comfortable circumstances, I wasn't. I was wanting to play act. I'd make puppets in a puppet theatre, and I would be all these characters. On a Sunday afternoon, I'd do it for my mother and my stepfather, and I'd come out. I'd written the script. I'd made the puppets, done the scenery, painted the scenery, and at the end I'd come out for my bow. And 99 times out of 100, they were fast asleep. So I would never. So I became very realistic about my prowess as a performer. I didn't think I was doing so well, but I still loved doing it. No idea that I wanted to do that professionally, but the energy I had as a child, you invent other people to play against. And I always had two, Johnson and Smith, because they were the two most common names. And so I'd have three of us would compete against each other, and I would try equally hard for each character, but it made me better at the things that I did. Wall tennis, for instance. I would give you an example. I mean, silly things, but energetic things.
How fascinating. Oh, there's a sort of competitive bit in there as well.
Yes, oh, absolutely, because I wasn't so good at academic things at school. Unless the teacher inspired me, and I think a lot of us, a lot of people are like this. Most people can remember at least two teachers' names, and those teachers were the most impressive people through your young life. I'm sure there are exceptions to what I'm saying. I mean, I'm speaking very personally when I say, oh, everyone. I'm not really meaning everyone. But I did have a great maths teacher. I wasn't particularly good at maths, but I really tried. Mr. Passy at my junior school, and he was a terrific character. And he also happened to direct the first school play they ever put on, and it was a Benjamin Britten opera called The Little Sweep. It's in two parts, Let's Make an Opera, and then the second half after the interval is The Little Sweep. So it's the children at school rehearsing is the first part, and who will play which part, and the second part is the actual opera that Britten wrote. And I loved it. I had such fun doing it. I was supposed to be outgoing, so I could do something. And in front of the school, we had our first performance in the school hall. People were laughing at what you had to do, and I wasn't being beaten after. They were laughing, which was normally the case. And then we had a major performance at Lambeth Town Hall in Brixton, which I think still stands there.
Yes, it does.
Even after my visit. Yeah. And we did this performance before the school. All the parents were there, local dignitaries, and the headmaster, who wasn't too keen on me, and the French master, who particularly wasn't keen because I couldn't concentrate and learn French fast enough for him. So they used to beat this sweet boy, and they loved their roles. They really loved it. So I came out, and they're beating me and singing verse after verse, and they ripped my shirt off, and I'm left with no top on at all, and all sooty body. And then I got these ragged shorts, and they ripped those off, and underwear. I've got some ragged underwear underneath, all black and sooty. So comes the opening night with the mayor, everybody there. They rip the shirt off, and up the chimney up you go. And the relish in their voices as they threw me round the stage. They pulled my trousers off, and I hadn't put any underwear on. And I had forgotten. They pulled the curtain down. They got so fast. People were whistling. I don't know if money was thrown, but... but it was no. It was horrific, and they thought I'd done it on purpose. And that, I mean, I really, truly hadn't done it on purpose. I mean, it was horrifying. So they gave me I got a beating for that, and put the pants on, and the curtain went up, and off we went, still going, and I'm still crying. And I was literally crying. So they thought it was one of the best performances they'd ever seen in Lambeth Town Hall.
So when did you sort of suddenly feel that this, acting might be the thing for you?
Well, it carried on after that. I enjoyed it so much that there was a master at school who was called Mr. Rayner, who wrote a school play, and it went on radio, on school's broadcast. And they needed someone to sing a song called Ramona. And he said, I know someone at the school who can sing. So I went along on the radio and sang Ramona in this play. And there was an agent there. And of course, we're chaperoned. And so my mother was with me. And he said, I'd like to send your son for some auditions for radio and so forth. And it started to work. I was 14. I was 12.
Really, that young?
Yes. So I started. The first professional job I had was Benjamin Britten's Let's Make an Opera. So it was my first amateur job at school, and then it became my first professional job. And after that, I started to do auditions. No singing involved. It was just playing. There used to be schools broadcasts from 11 till 12 on the home service, BBC home service, and also from 2 till 3 in the afternoon. So that's 3 broadcasts, 20-minute broadcasts per hour, so 6 a day. And the BBC had a repertory company of artists who would perform in all these. And in the end, by the time I'd finished, I'd done 500 radio broadcasts by the time I was about 16 or 17.
Really?
Yeah. So that was my education.
Crikey.
And I loved my education because you were doing historic shows about all the kings of England, the queens of England, geography about countries in the world, farming in Vietnam, all these things one would never dream about learning or reading about. And then you do modern plays that would educate somehow to youngsters. And it also taught me a terrific discipline. I mean, it could have been better because I was still a bit of a rascal, but it was always fun. And I don't think my discipline came until much later in my career, sort of mid-career, which I'll come to a little later. But that was really where I learned about being on time at the BBC. You can't go in there, good evening, here is the 10:10 news. You've got to be there at 10 o'clock for the news if you're reading it. So it was very strong, the discipline, and that started to go inside your head. And now to this day, I'm still. My aim is always to be somewhere halfway.
So that's part of almost your professionalism, which you've had throughout your career.
Well, it grew. The professionalism grew. That was time awareness that I had when I was working on the radio because, as I say, you had to have it. The curtain goes up at 8 o'clock in the theatre, so you've got to be there. And I'm there nowadays ridiculously early. I mean, I'll go in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for an evening show because I've got mail to do and I've got a warm-up to do, and then I have something to eat and a little nap, and I'm ready and energized to be in that world from 8 till 10.
I suppose the sort of the energetic physicality of your characterizations really came to bear with Frank Spencer.
Well, yes, some mothers had been offered to Ronnie Barker and who was Norman Wisdom, and they both turned it down. And when I read it, I wanted him to be real. What I was reading was a funny character. I wanted him to be a real character. I wanted him to be clumsy in the way the awkwardness was inside him. It came from inside him through a fear of life, but a love of life and a love of the people around him, but he couldn't express himself properly. So, I mean, the unbelievable thing is how he ever ended up marrying someone as lovely as Betty.
Indeed.
Because she was so kind. And the minute Michelle Doutrice walked in for an audition, as soon as she walked through the door, I knew she was the girl.
Yes.
And we are still very, very good friends to this day. Both our families are friends, and I adore her. She's a wonderful lady and was a great girl to work with. So that there was a truth there. There was an affection between us as people, and that we'd use in our dialogue. The writing, Raymond Allen, who wrote the dialogue, and some of the stories, other stories I wrote, and he hear what we were doing and would tailor it to our relationship, so that when he heard he was going to have a baby, that was so excited, there were tears in his eyes. That he was so.
I think there were tears in the audience's eyes, actually.
Well, they couldn't believe that. Yeah. But it was great that the public took to the truth of what was going on. And I think I learned that from watching, as a child, people like Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, Laurel and Hardy. I found a truth in those stories. I believe those fellows lived. I believe those two characters moved that piano down that hill, and it ran away accidentally, and Stan Laurel was absolutely mortified, and you felt for him, and you joined in the drama of it. So there's a drama in comedy, but it's not cruel. It's you'll see the villain hit them on the head, but it's with a plank, which you know is just, it's silliness. And so there's a farcical thing about it as well, which was where I wanted to bring the physicality. Yes. And the physicality comes from being a boy. You know, you'll get girls who are tomboys who get up to mission, climb trees as well. Of course, I'm not being sexist about it. We all have a sense of fun when we're kids. Well, but we can get into trouble doing it. Roller skating down the road and thinking, oh, I might grab on the back of that bus and get pulled along is not acceptable. But when I wrote it into the script and and I was pulled along, then I got paid for it as well. It was bliss. It was just bliss.
But obviously, you were very well known for doing your stunts, where I think many people probably wouldn't have wanted to take on those stunts. What drove you to really want to do those things?
Well, many of them were my ideas, so therefore it was.
You had no choice.
I know, I was a volunteer. Anything that could put, again, with the influence of those people I saw when I was a kid.
Yes.
And they still remain in my head today, like the teachers. There are, a few teachers' names that we remember. There were people in the entertainment. Danny Kaye had a great influence on me when I saw him live at the London Palladium. So I suppose when I got serious about doing, you actually arrive in the West End. You are so excited and so pleased, simple word, to be there, that your energy levels are way, way high, and they have to be. Rehearsals are hard. You do long days, and you absolutely dedicate yourself to putting this show on. And then when you open, you've got 8 shows a week to do, which people say, gosh, it's a lot, 8 shows a week to do. It is a lot. And you have to be as fit as you can possibly be. And the thing is, if you do and you open in a show, for instance, Barnum, it was great physicality. Walking the wire, you were on trapeze, you were on in practice, you were on trapeze, you were on trampolines, jumping up to heights. You were non-stop energy. That was really unlike anything anyone was seeing at that time, and And so when you got the reaction from an audience who stood at the end of every show, that energizes you to come back the next night and you want to be as good as you were the night before because they've never seen you. The new audience, you can't just sit down now. You've got to do that and deliver every night. So, I mean, even as I talk about it, I'm punching air and I've got a grin from ear to ear because they were such happy memories of 4 years we did.
So I was going to ask, at what point did you start to see that physicality in your performance as really an essential part of the way you acted?
Well, I had the opportunity. I was doing a play on Broadway called Black Comedy by Peter Shaffer, and it was seen by a gentleman called Roger Edens. He'd been part of the musical theatre in Hollywood. So he came and saw it and reported to Gene Kelly in Los Angeles. They were looking for a Cornelius Hackle for the film, the movie version of Hello Dolly, with starring Barbra Streisand and Walter Matthau. And so they contacted my agent in London and they said, we'd like you to come over and meet Mr. Kelly. And so I was flown over to San Francisco. I met him. I had to fly to San Francisco because he was there for some reason or other. And I had this interview with him, and I was so nervous. There was this great big coffee table, and he's saying, "Now, listen, kid," he said, after 10 minutes conversation with me, he said, what we're looking for is an attractive idiot. Now, my wife, she's seen you. She thinks you're attractive. And I think you're an idiot. He said, so I want you to go back to England. I want you to do a test for me. And so I came back to England. I got one of the dancers from West Side Story to teach me the basics of movement. And of course, you know the energy that was within West Side Story. Yes. Well, to have that put into you, and you're there with 2 left feet, it was quite a sort of test for that person, and give me help to get me there. But we did the test, and I got the role. I got the role out of oh, I can't believe, but I got the role, and went and worked with Gene Kelly and Barbra and Streisand and Walter Matthau and Michael Kidd, who did the choreography, who was in 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. So the energy on that set, I was over there for about 6 months with a long rehearsal period, about 3 months. 12 weeks I did about 3 or 4 numbers. So that's a lot of rehearsal. I'd never known a work routine like it. And that is where my discipline started. That's where it really began. So at that age, I was about 25, I suppose. And it installed in me, and I became, I'm proud to say, a good friend of Gene Kelly and his family. And he would come up to the house on a Sunday with an idea that he had for Monday morning. I mean, this man was unreal.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. And he was my greatest mentor, without a shadow of a doubt, in my career. And I love the man to bits to this day.
Incredible.
Watch any Gene Kelly film and see the energy and the style he had. And it's natural. It's not, and I'm not putting down any style of a dancer, but he and Fred Astaire had it, but Gene had it like a guy with mischief. No, he had a strength. He looked like fella enjoying the fact he just jumped up on the table to sing. And then he said he'd sing. He didn't have the greatest singing voice. It didn't matter. He meant it. He meant every word. It's very clear. Our love is here to stay. And you just thought, oh my God, that's a man singing to a woman, and you believed every minute of it. He gave you a glow when you watched him, and they were great films. He and Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, who I met. It was a terrific time. So it installed in me a newfound discipline that went beyond, and an energy to do as much as I possibly could about being physically fit and right on top of everything, so that the fitter you were, the longer you'd last on a stage, the longer you'd last. You don't let anyone down. And I think that began everything.
Which was the role, you think, where that ethos really manifested itself?
Not long after that, when I did Billy, Billy Liar, it was called Billy at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane for 2 years. John Barry wrote the music, Don Black wrote the Ian LaFrennay and Dick Clements wrote the book, the adaptation for the stage. And Honor White, who did Oliver, the film, who did the choreography. I mean, that's a top LA name. And Broadway girl, the discipline there for the dancing. I had never danced like that. And I learned to tap dance. Thank goodness I had a flat right over a garage, so that it was only the mechanics. I drove crazy every day. Yeah. That really was the biggest test for me. And I did 2 years, and I think I missed about 6 shows in that 2 years.
At this point, I reflected that despite Michael's growing reputation as a stage actor, he was still known in Britain for the BBC TV show Some Mothers Do Have 'Em. Incredibly, that show drew in audiences of 25 million, unheard of in current times. But it was Michael's role in The Phantom of the Opera where he became an international star, and where we saw a completely different side to his acting talents.
I think when Phantom arrived, I was still doing Barnum, but I was going to a singing teacher, so to develop my voice and keep, not purposely developing it. I just wanted to develop sustainability to do 8 shows a week without harming, because when you're shouting, you can do the wrong thing, you can do some damage to the throat, to the vocal cords. So I used to go and sing every week something classical, and one week I went along and Andrew Lloyd Webber arrived with Sarah Brightman early to go, and they went downstairs in the kitchen and waited underneath the studio where Ian Adam was teaching me. And at the end of my lesson, I was singing Caroselve, and at the end of the lesson, I went out the front door, said goodbye, and Andrew apparently came up and said, "Who was that?" And Ian said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Ian." He said, "Did he disturb you? He's still learning it, but he's doing so well. I'm so proud of him." And he said, "Who was it?" So he said, "It was Michael Crawford. I do No. I think we may have found our Phantom." And that was
how amazing,
unbelievable,
circumstantial. Almost.
Yes. And he'd seen, I think, everyone in London apart from the stage doorkeeper. So it was circumstantial to say I must have had an angel on my shoulder that day.
So how did you approach that character?
I went along and met Andrew, and he played. They'd already recorded the actual song of The Phantom of the Opera. They'd already recorded that, so it was a big sound. And they called, I think it was the overture, is what they were doing. And the hair stood up on the back of my neck as I listened to it. And I remember I had my head down, sort of looking at my knees, sitting, and my eyes closed, just concentrating. And I remember the hair went up on the back of my head, and my arms, and I clenched my fists, and I held myself to listen to it. My head came up, and one side of my shoulder went up, and I felt the music. I felt the music. I can't describe that. I can't explain that. That is what happened to me. And I just felt that I'd connected with it somehow. That sounds so pretentious, and he then played me the music of the night, and it was just beautiful. It was just beautiful. And I went away and I practiced it day and night. Ian would have me over every day for 2-hour lessons instead of 1 hour. Then I'd go home and I'd practice 2-3 hours more a day for a month. And the hardest part I was finding was close your eyes, let your spirit start to soar. Just to do that one note, that one high note going into the soft head. And that was the hardest part, without sounding as though you're going, start to soar. You mustn't have sounds like that. It's got to be something very smooth. And I wanted it to be hypnotic. I didn't, and he let me. Andrew actually let me do this. He let me sing with, instead of his, and it's his music, Mark, you know, he wrote this. Yes. So I could have started slowly, gently, sing it as a tenor, if that's what I was doing then. And he didn't. He let me, this man who'd never been loved, he'd never been held, he'd never known what love is. And when he had started to fixate on this girl, it was slowly, gently. He let me do that. And I'd always loved listening. One of my favorite instruments is the saxophone. And I wanted to sound like Stan Getz. This may sound so absurd to people, but these are the pictures I had in my head. I wanted the breath to be heard. I remember Peggy Lee, Julie London. These singers used to sing with so much breath. Well, you can't do long phrases letting that much breath out. It's very hard. So the singing lessons I had expanded my lungs. And my chest, I'd always been skinny as a rake. By practicing all these long phrases, I put on 4 inches on my chest. Yeah, at 4 inches.
No idea that was even possible.
Well, look at the size of my rib cage. I'm now the shape of a chicken. So if I lie on the kitchen table at Christmas, I'm done for. So, but it really did happen that you start to expand. Your diaphragm expands so much, but you practice for hours and hours and hours and hours, like a dancer has to practice to keep their extension, to keep their strength.
There's a huge commitment to the role and to getting it right.
Yes.
The other thing, my other observation was that you also used your physicality to really bring that character to life, didn't you?
Well, there was nothing to show. You had half a face, you had your hands and your body. And with the help of the late dear and beautiful Gillian Lynn, she gave me and worked with me to make my body larger than I am, to move with some degree of grace, to use this, to make me aware of right down to the end of my fingertips and go into the ground, to move like a cat. I wanted to move just, again, slowly, and so that it was, to make it as hypnotic as one could, making that movement towards someone, not ugly, but romantic and make it a dream. So she enabled me. She definitely enabled me with movements I didn't think I had. But again, you've got to use so much strength to walk on your toes and then go down on the whole foot and then take another step, rising slowly through, and your body and you've still got a looseness about the rest of your body, but controlled. It was another world. It was just another world. And she was just such a great teacher. And one more thing about the creation of the character, the depth that you go into to seek out this loveless person that had no love and was given nothing. You can sympathize with him. The audience can sympathize and care for him, even though he's killing people. So I don't know where the justification comes within all that, but to me, I had to find this night. There was this little boy that when we were in Barnum, we used to go to hospital visits every week because we were all dressed, keep our costume and go out as a clown or whatever and do tricks in the wards, in the children's wards. It was in the road towards Vauxhall Bridge. There was a hospital along there, and I don't think it's there anymore. And coming out afterwards, walking downstairs instead of walking up the main stairs, he went down the back stairs, and there was underneath the stairs was a bed, and there was this little boy in it sitting with his mother. He was deformed, badly deformed head, face. And this little boy, we sat down and did some tricks, and he just stared at us, and you wondered what was behind those little eyes, and never forgot that little boy. And to me, I took him and based Eric, the name of the Phantom. I based him on this little boy. And so I could find the emotion every single night by the end when this dream was over, the girl was over, and just something that happened in rehearsal. Sarah Brightman played Christine in rehearsal. She dropped the veil as she ran, and it was an accident. And I walked over to the veil and I picked it up and I held it to my face and I smelled it. And it's the same as if someone we lose passes on and you can still smell that person. And I'm sure a lot of people will recognize that. And that you hold it and it's everything in the world to you. And I sang the last line with that. It's over now. The music of the night. I sang partially with this all over my mouth, and the hurt. It was just so deep. And I could find that every night because of this little boy.
Amazing.
So all those things go together, the energy that's given to you by what you've learned from people like Gene Kelly, Gillian Lynn, people like that, who, if we're open to it, we can learn and learn and learn.
Michael went on to perform Phantom 1,300 times over 2.5 years. In the original review in the New York Times, after opening on Broadway, Frank Rich described Michael's performance as mesmerising. And in the LA Herald Examiner, Richard Staten wrote, "The major cause for my personal phantomania is the man behind the mask, the unheralded Michael Crawford." Phantom went on to be an enormous hit. So Phantom must have been a crescendo of your career to that point. How did things evolve after that?
After, I went into, for the first time, doing concerts around the world. This had enabled me to be known. We'd sold so many albums. And so I was able to go across America. We were doing 20,000 seaters, wow. Sheds they call them, where the rock and roll. We were following Guns N' Roses around, and literally it was that. You couldn't believe that it was happening to you, and we loved every moment of it. Had a wonderful time. Then did another one that was with the music of Andrew Lloyd Webber, and then I did my own tour and did the same circuit with slightly smaller venues. And so that was pretty exhausting, absolutely exhausting, but you still had the energy to do it all over the world.
There is no doubt at this point in his career that Michael was on the top of his game, but he was not a conventional musical or acting star. To quote a review, There are few performers in Britain who would match up to Crawford's acrobatic, charming and often breathtaking versatility. When talking to Michael, you can see he really cares passionately about the characters that he's portraying. He really digs very deep to find that emotional core. But I wonder whether this commitment to his craft and his desire to extract that emotional depth came at a cost. Above all, though, I found Michael to be warm-hearted, sensitive, committed and with a wonderful sense of fun, which he clearly has drawn on throughout his career. Be sure to subscribe to get notifications for the second part of this episode, where we talk about the illness that curtailed his career for 7 years and his subsequent triumphant return to the West End stage. See you soon. Go safely.